Hi, comrades, and welcome to this week's Online Communist Forum. And Jack Conrad will give a presentation based on the political report of the PCC. The title of this week's presentation is Drones Over Poland and Phasing into World War III. So I'll just hand over to Jack now to begin his presentation. Thank you.
Yeah, just like last week, we actually didn't have a PCC meeting today because we had an aggregate. So this is unfiltered me. So I'm going to begin, as it says on the can, 19 drones over Poland. There's also news, I don't know if it's just breaking, but I just noticed it, of something similar over Romania, whether that's deliberate, accidental, a provocation. I'm just not qualified to comment, and so I'm going to avoid that until I read something, at least that I regard as trustworthy. So I think it happened. You've got the wreckage of, well, it looks like an Iranian Russian drone. I can't remember their name, but the famous delta wing shape. And also, what we've had is various Western countries, and I'm talking about Western European countries, rushing aircraft to Poland and to the east. So there's pictures of, presumably from the archives, of Typhoons and various other fighter aircraft going east. But I think the long and the short of it is, and I could be wrong here, that the sort of 8 month of Trump diplomacy seems at least to have run out of track. I won't put it stronger than that. I could be wrong, as I said, on that. In other words, all the sort of Kellogg plan of freezing the frontier, letting Russia keep what it's got, roughly speaking, 20% of pre-2014 Ukrainian territory, conceding Crimea, Sevastopol, Russian fleet back there, going down to the Mediterranean. That seems to have come to an end, at least when I wrote the article for this week's paper. It seemed to me that it was coming to an end. And what we had is Trump again threatening increased sanctions, and various Trump officials were talking about going from phase one sanctions, i.e. what we've got at the moment, to phase two and maybe even phase three. But that includes also sanctioning those that are trading with Russia. And we already have sanctions or tariffs, another word for it, I suppose, on India. And that's had a sort of definite economic effect on India. But also you could argue, and again, six of one, half a dozen of another. There's also been this perhaps potential rapprochement between India and China. India turning up to the VJ Day anniversary in Beijing. I think it was Beijing, but anyway, somewhere in China. And pictures, of Modi, Putin, and Xi shaking hands and looking pretty chummy. And then we had, buggering up my article, I don't know whether he read my article, this week, looked at the picture of Zelensky and phasing into World War III. And then he said, okay, if you stop importing oil, and I presume gas, then I'll put more sanctions on. Now, given that some Western European countries have expressed absolutely no interest in doing that. That's a big ask. So I'm guessing, Slovakia, Hungary. I don't know about the others, but I could hazard a guess at maybe Italy. I just don't know. I haven't bothered looking it up. But given that the EU is a sort of Ruritanian ramshackle organization, cannot impose, majority votes. Basically, what Trump is saying, well, you do the impossible, and I'll do the sanctions, phase 2, phase 3 on Russia and its trading partners, and that would include, crucially, China. And I expressed in my article, and I think this is, on firmer ground, that the model that they have in mind is Germany, World War One, World War Two. Maybe, if they read enough history, they could go back to the, Napoleonic Wars. But I think it's Germany, World War One, World War Two, and the extreme economic difficulties that Germany experienced, like in World War One, hunger. The supply of rubber. I know it developed its own artificial rubber industry. The question of oil, and again, the Caucasus, and the question again of coal into oil, all of these things. But nonetheless, Germany was definitely affected. It wasn't brought down by sanctions, but we should understand sanctions not as a sort of soft humanitarian, how should I put it? Well, this is the sort of a civilized way to, rap countries over the knuckles who've been behaving badly. The sort of Tony Benn version of politics. Don't go to war. Bung some sanctions on. The fact of the matter is that precisely as Germany, World War One, World War Two show, really what sanctions are is a form of economic warfare. It's a form of siege warfare. And therefore, we shouldn't think of it as a soft option, a sort of a non-violence. Just look at Gaza under siege warfare. This is something that genuinely leads to suffering. But then my argument was, and this still applies, Germany. You could sort of surround Germany. One, you had the Royal Navy. So, going in, going out of Germany by sea was just about possible for a couple of battleships. You could do it with submarines, but you couldn't do it, with oil tankers or, what do you want to call it? The merchant navy or that sort of type thing. Basically, Germany was cut off from the sea when it came to economics. And then you had the drive by Germany down into Romania, the drive of Germany down to the Caucasus to get oil. But nonetheless, Germany was still surrounded. And as I said, this was something that wasn't only something to do with the Royal Navy. It was also, the British control of the insurance industry, global finance, and all the rest of it. Either way, my argument is that I don't think that Russia is the equivalent of Germany. So you can put sanctions on Russia. The problem is, if you look at a map, it's bloody big, and it's got lots of resources. And next door, it's got this place called China, which is the world's #2 economy. And China hasn't sort of been provocative in terms of its trade with Russia. It hasn't been overt, like North Korea sending troops or anything like that. It's not meant to send any arms, but nonetheless, we know that there's a huge trade in oil and gas. And we also know that, Russian military equipment gets chips and all the rest of it via China. And what is noticeable about the Shanghai economic summit that's just recently taken place is the agreement, and this is Russia pushing, we want you to import more cheap liquefied natural gas from us. China's been reluctant, has been sort of holding back on that. Okay, they've come to a memorandum of agreement to build this bloody pipeline through Mongolia, and apparently it will take 10 years. Either way, what you've got is Russia locking itself in to China, and effectively, okay, it's a metaphor, don't take it literally, but basically constituting itself the Austria-Hungary to Germany. Except what we're dealing with here is precisely countries that dominate the world, Ireland, China, well, the United States is vital for China, but China's also vital for the United States. So my basic argument is that, yes, sanctions have been a right nuisance if you're, an oligarch or something like that. Yeah, lots of Russian money has been frozen. It's a nuisance that you have to get chips this way and that way. It's awkward that you have to have what was it called, like a shadow fleet, with its signal system switch. It's a nuisance, but there are loopholes, and Russia's got through those loopholes. So my basic feeling is that if we're right, and Ukraine isn't really, from an American point of view, really about Ukraine, really from an American point of view, what this is about is stopping the irresistible rise of China, then the logic, even though Trump has buggered up my article this week, the logic that I'm pointing to is correct. In other words, what America wants, and this seems to be the case, is to tie Europe and Russia into an antagonistic relationship. It will be NATO European forces that are meant to be stationed along the new border under the soft underbelly of Russia. And meanwhile, Europe commits itself to upping its arms expenditure from, roughly speaking, 2% up to 2.5%. And although there's some creative accountancy there, up to 5% by 2035. And of course, the majority or the bulk of the arms is intended to be brought from the United States. So European money goes into America, it acts as a stimulus. Meanwhile, either peace or war, Ukraine acts as a depressant, an economic depressant in Europe. Tribute is extracted from Europe and goes to America, which then can concentrate on its real main enemy, which isn't Russia, it's China. And of course, the hope is that at some point, and again, I'm a little bit skeptical here, that Russia has some sort of economic crisis, more likely, though, a political military crisis, and the regime collapses. Putin is given the heave-ho. Maybe there's a colored revolution. Maybe there's the breakup of Russia. Much harder, by the way, than the breakup of the Soviet Union. There's lots of autonomous republics, but I think apart from one or two of them, there's a pretty solid Russian majority throughout the Russian Federation. Either way, that seems to be the American plan. At least that's my reading of it. And of course, if you look at it from that point of view, you then say, well, I can understand why Putin, even though he was offered the red carpet, declined. Because in my view, at least, if he'd accepted, while, in the Times and the Telegraph and the BBC, the Mirror, the Sun, I don't know, would have greeted this peace as a Western victory, a Putin victory in Russia, it would be viewed as a Russian defeat, a humiliation. Because although you get 20% of Ukraine, what you get is 100,000 NATO troops and NATO equipment, NATO missiles, NATO air defense, and presumably also the possibility of American NATO air defense for the rump Ukraine. So that's my argument, and therefore talk that I've heard on the left that, well, we can forget the Trump 24-hour stuff. No one took that seriously. I always took that as a sort of, well, I can fix things sort of type thing, not 24 hours. But the talk that I've heard on the left that Ukraine, that's yesterday's war threat. That's over. It's peace in Ukraine. It's just a matter of, I think that was false. That was delusional. And although I, of course, recognize the possibility of peace, it's going to be a crisis peace, if you see the point. So the idea that Ukraine is over, it's finished, we can ignore it, I think is profoundly mistaken. I don't know how long it will go on, but at the moment, it looks like for some considerable time. And for all the talk of Russian advances, I mean, come on, guys, really look at the map. And what you've got is sort of World War I style advances at huge cost, and no rapid movement, and no rapid movement, I think, should be expected. Now, again, I could be vastly wrong on that. It's not inconceivable that you could have a collapse of morale on the Ukrainian side. So I'm not trying to suggest for one moment that things are clear and it's obvious what is going on, but I think I can make the argument that the Ukraine war isn't over and isn't going to be over anytime soon. That's as far as I would be prepared to go. Okay, just turning to the left on that. I've repeated the argument about RS-21. I don't want to pick up the phone and ask someone, well, what was the vote? My argument here with the comrades in RS-21, it's good that they disaffiliated from the Ukraine Solidarity Campaign. My God, even the Alliance for Workers' Liberty has let their affiliation lapse because of Chris Ford's close association, I'll call it, with a former fascist. I mean, maybe he's still a fascist. When I've read the website of this People's Party in Ukraine, formed by veterans and other patriotic I mean, to me, that was pretty Tommy Robinson-y, So again, I don't know. But either way, if it was too much for the AWL, that does say something. But my point really about RS-21 is, yes, you overthrew that, but what's Dave Renton's position? What about the majority that moved affiliation? How big are they? Are they still defending that position? I don't know. This stuff ought to be out in the open. It's not a question of, well, I could be told all about it in a pub. To me, such struggles need to be out in the open. And what lesson did the comrades draw from the fact that their organization was in as an affiliate from the Ukraine Solidarity Campaign, not only with its links, and again, I'm going to say this, maybe with former fascists, maybe with fascists, but also links historically with the CIA. What the hell were you doing in that organization in the first place? And all I can say is when I go to the RS-21 website and I key in Ukraine, I don't exactly get a flood of articles as you would in the Weekly Worker covering the Ukraine question, looking at what the left is saying on the question, looking at its international significance. There's a deadly silence on that. Is it a diplomatic silence that would upset the other side? I don't know. But it's not a question, as I said, of me being informed. It's a question of the left, the workers' movement, both in Britain and internationally, being informed on this. Okay, I'm going to deal with this very quickly. We've got an article on Mandelson and Angela Rayner. We've already covered Angela Rayner. The prediction in the article, I think, was pretty safe. Bell won't get it to the first round. She wouldn't get enough nominations. Well, what a surprise. What she's doing is putting herself forward as the leader of the campaign group. That's what that was all about. We have two candidates in the race. Okay, one's a sort of anti-Burnham type critic. One's a Starmer-ite. Okay. But what we've got the article on coming really is about corruption as opposed to internal Labour Party politics. And all you have to say with corruption is not only the petty corruption of 40,000 quid with Angela Rayner. Okay, to me, that's a fortune. And all her freebies, remember? And Keir Starmer's suits and the concerts and the holidays and a buyer to go out and get you clothes from Oxford Street or Regent Street, I should say, or whatever. God help us, the sort of petty, horrible, I'm open to being sold. But no, I mean, Mandelson is a byword for corruption. And no one can ever forget I'm perfectly relaxed about the filthy rich. Really what he meant by that is I arse-lick the filthy rich. And that's what the Epstein, episode has shown. So, okay. I don't know what Starmer knew, but the fact of the matter is that what we've got is the right wing of the Labour. And I say right wing because they're in power, as opposed, I'm not saying the left is pure, but they don't get their snouts in the trough. The right is absolutely up there. Having said that, just look at Bell and her, Ghana, bottom of the poll ladder. What the hell was a member of the campaign group? Is it to go and visit her relatives? No. This isn't a paid position, but it is the first step. And again, just look at the background. Student politics, straight in, and then you start working for Diane Abbott, then you become an MP. It's like looking at those that surround Jeremy Corbyn today, failed Labour candidates who fancy their careerist chances. And no, they're intelligent people, but they're not politicians. And I mean politicians in our sense of the word. These are not partisans of the working class. They're partisans of themselves. And that is a fundamental difference. In other words, you work for David Lammy one day, you work for Jeremy Corbyn the next, and if his campaign goes bust, you work for someone else. And the aim is you want to become an MP, you want to become a professional paid politician who then is bribed, and they make their money. In Britain, they tend to make their money after they leave office, like Boris Johnson. Tony Blair, 40 million to 60 million quid purportedly in the bank. Where's he get that from? Advisory work, using his contacts, using his knowledge, prostituting himself. Okay, moving on. We were just talking before we went online about Unite the Kingdom. The figure that I heard last night was over 100,000 people marched. Amazing. Maybe 108,000. The figure I just read before coming here was 150,000. All this is going to be estimate, done by helicopters and, looking at sizes. I don't think anyone's there with a counter. You don't estimate that. The reports are of Stand Up to Racism. The official figure from the police, from the authorities, is 5,000. Their figure is 20,000. Either way, the turnout for the Robinson demonstration clearly, overwhelmed stand up to racism. And the question is, first of all, how to respond. And my own take on it is, well, let's start off how not to respond. I myself think that just calling this 100,000, and again, I didn't go down to Whitehall. I had a day off, if you write an article or whatever. But calling this 100,000, this 150,000 chant, Nazi scum, off our street. I don't think that's effective. I don't think no platforming is effective. I was just listening to a comrade talking about establishing a JCP branch up in the north, and saying that he would be fearful going out leafleting. Well, precisely. So you're going to know platform what is a social movement, what is a mass movement that not only takes the form, of course, of Tommy Robinson, that's its outlier, but also of reform, which is way ahead consistently in opinion polls. You're going to know platform reform. It's an absurdity. And the fact that the left is still repeating no platform, and is no platforming itself at the moment, which is just crazy, over the trans question, I think shows you a left that's lost the plot. Again, a comrade pointed out to me, and again, I know this history because we had comrade Ben Lewis writing a series of very good articles that would be worthwhile looking at again over the Nazi communist debates in the early 20s in Germany. They used to have debates. And what is interesting of the reports of these debates is it was the Nazis that called it off because they lost members because of these debates to the communists. Remember, the communists weren't the majority party of the working class. They were a minority. So the communists were fighting. And again, I'm not saying I'm not critical of them, but I don't think my criticism is that they debated with the Nazis. It's not a principle that you must, but it is a principle that you don't rule it out. And really what I'm saying is that if you take the left and it's no platforming, it's silly, calling these people German nationalists or German national socialists. The vast majority of these people are English chauvinists, and they will have in their heads Winston Churchill, Margaret Thatcher, and the Church of England, apparently, according to the recent report I was reading from Sky News, people carrying crosses and talking about our religion. This is English or British nationalism, right? We need to recognize it for what it is and not try to imagine that these people are, goose stepping, advocates of, going away and reading Mein Kampf and becoming German. They are British, and Britain can produce you fascism just as much as Germany, just as much as Austria, or any country for that matter. So I have read a little bit. I haven't read much, simply because the march only happened yesterday, and I think most of the left are doing what I did and going, what? 100,000 plus, 150,000 with the left trapped on both ends of Whitehall and the police helping them get home. That was the reality. There were so many on the Tommy Robinson march, it overflowed, both along the embankment and at the bottom and the top of Whitehall. But the responses that I've read, okay, these are instant responses, I think still shows a left that is showing no clue of thinking. So one suggestion, and this isn't just from one person or one organization, is, what we need is a broader anti-racist movement. And what we need to do, this is the other suggestion, we need to get along celebrities. This is going to just hopeless perspective. No, the answer isn't broader. The answer is politics. The answer is organizing the working class into a political party. And to do that, we've actually got to overcome the transitional method, which gives you the excuse of split. We've got to overcome, old certainties like no platforming, and the idea that you can silence something that clearly has deep social roots. This isn't just a few nutters. This is something that is rooted deep in British society at the present time, and it's not going to go away anytime soon. Okay, and on that same theme, again, no profound comments. We've got an article commissioned from our Paul D'Amate on the Charlie Kirk murder. I'd sort of vaguely heard of this guy, but I'm not a student of American politics. So, yeah, I've heard of this bloke. When he was assassinated, I mean, I didn't know who'd done it. You would suspect it could have been someone on the left. We know a little bit more now. Either way, my response to it was, and then I read the mass media, my response to it was, this is a Reichstag moment. And then when I read the mainstream media all saying the same thing, I went, oh, Jack, you really are showing a lack of imagination. Nonetheless, it's like, the beer hall putsch. Everyone said that about the Trump self-coup. Okay, except I think actually that the beer hall putsch was more serious than the Trump attempted self-coup. Either way, I think there's a truth still there. Now, I don't think myself that what's going to happen within the next few months is the Democrat Party is going to be banned, and American senators in the Democrat Party, Congress people, are going to end up in concentration camps. I don't think that's going to happen. But I have been warning, and I've been raising it every time I meet comrades from America. And, I've attended the MUG conference. We all heard the report of the DSA convention in Chicago. I've raised, well, comrades, did you actually debate Trump and the nature of Trump and the danger, the possibility that you will be declared illegal? You would be declared a terrorist organization. I don't know what the legislation in America would be, but we've already had it in Britain with Palestine Action. The protests they were engaged in was terrorism. No, it was protest. But this has now become terrorism. So to call someone like Charlie Kirk a fascist, a Nazi, I don't know what I would call him. I don't know enough about his politics. I'd certainly say he was far right. I'd certainly say he has an authoritarian agenda. But again, I don't know. Either way, a lot of comrades on the left will be calling him a Nazi, will be calling him a fascist. And what we get, and I think this is the more serious suggestion, that to do such a thing opens you up to criminal prosecution, and maybe therefore organizations which promote that message face a state ban. And I think that is a real danger in the United States. And again, I can just repeat my point that comrades who are used to operating in the DSA and expressing themselves openly and freely, that's great. We should also at least think about what would we do if they did pass such a law? Where would we operate? How would we operate? Or do we shut up? I think for communists, the last option isn't an option. We're not going to shut up. So we need to learn ways, perhaps. And again, this is the internet age. It's not the same age as, smuggling Iskra in, from Britain or wherever the hell they smuggled it in from, or the German press from Switzerland under the Bismarckian anti-socialist laws. Nonetheless, they can switch you off. We know that. All this stuff about the internet being free, remember the early days, unrestricted communications. We've seen that not to be the case. Okay, you can get around things, and that's true. And so we need to actually at least think about that possibility. How do we exploit legal possibilities? Of course. But how do we protect ourselves at the same time? At least we ought to think about that. Okay, moving on to the JCP, YP. I've already, mentioned the trans question. It's not that I take the view, by the way, that we shouldn't take a stand. I think we should take a stand when trans people are being attacked. And that's something we should do. But should we start now platforming ourselves? That's something else. And note, and I'll come to him if I get the time, we have HH from RS21, Harry H, writing a letter talking about us, the CPGB, using dog whistle politics to attack trans people. Now, is this, Harry, is this the Mike McNair part 1 article, or is it Mike McNair, like 5,000 word part 2 article, or is it part 3 of his 5,000 word series of articles, 5,000 word each? Is this dog whistle attack, or is it Mike McNair debating Roxy Hall at Communist University? I don't recognize it, but I recognize dishonest polemic here. I recognize precisely dog whistle tactics being used against the CPGB. And clearly what this is designed to do is saying, don't touch the CPGB, they are transphobes. And that to me is unacceptable politics. We're prepared to debate our position on the trans question. And what we say, which is upsets comrades, is that we will not tail the trans movement. We have got our own position. We're not going to trail the bourgeois feminist movement. We're not going to trail the Irish nationalist movement. We're not going to trail the Scottish nationalist movement. We have our own political program, but it's not a tailist program. So we're not going to repeat the slogans, that are insisted on by the likes of RS21, who are into tailist politics. That isn't transphobic. That is not using dog whistle politics. It's the opposite. That's exactly what Harry H. is doing, and I think it's disgraceful. It's disgraceful politics, and the sneering attitude. Oh, they only produce a weekly paper, but they don't go to, what was it called? We demand change. I'm sorry, I couldn't be bothered myself. What's the point of going to a SWP talking shop where people talk rubbish? I could have turned up, could have dished out the paper, but God's sake, this is hardly, the sort of cockpit of class struggle. No, what we did, comrade, is we intervened, for example, in the Labour Party. What we did, for example, is produce a special issue of Labour Party Marxist for each Labour Party conference, along with red pages for the Labour Party conference every day of the Labour Party conference, and not least because of our intervention, not least because of Tina Becker's intervention. Haven't you seen all those pictures of the Labour Party conference with Palestine flags? Who the hell do you think that was? So the idea that the CPGB is passive, and he actually then says, oh, comrades in Australia, comrades in Germany, comrades in the Netherlands, comrades in the United States, comrades in Poland, be aware that the CPGB has no influence, and it's hated in Britain. Well, it has influence, and yes, sometimes people do hate us, but clearly our ideas are spreading. They're spreading in Britain. They're also spreading internationally. So two fingers up to you, Harry H. So I mean that in a rude way, by the way. Okay, but anyway, back to the Y Party, your party. I just thought I would take up the Green Party question, because this is being debated, of course, in the aftermath of the stunning victory of Zach Polansky. I mean, Jesus, against two MPs. He's a London Assembly member, so we have heard of him. But 85 to 15%. Wow. I know people have been joining the Green Party, not least due to the SWP platforming Zach, in things like We Demand Change and meetings both in London and regionally. He's been scooping people up from the left. They've been joining. Most of them have joined up in order precisely to do, the election, to elect Zach, because he's what he calls himself an eco-populist. Now, again, I haven't read enough. I need to read more. But what eco-populism basically consists of is the Green Party on ecology. So that's, reducing CO2, neutral by 2030, blah, 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 public transport, insulate houses. But he introduces things like, I hate billionaires. There should be a tax on the very rich. Um, you know, I'm opposed to NATO, not quite now, but with Donald Trump, and again, this is from the horse's mouth, but it's basically out of date. That's his line with Donald Trump. NATO is out of date because the Green Party, remember, is a democratic party, unlike Y Party looks like becoming, and they have conferences which set their policy. So Zach is the leader elected, by a Zoomocracy, but his policy on NATO is that the Greens support NATO, and they came out explicitly in support of NATO after the Russian special military operation. And of course, I won't go on about the German Greens and their attitude and supporting arms. But what I will say is, what do you want to replace it by then? A European defence pact. So, I mean, does that mean a socialist Britain, a socialist France, a socialist? No, it means a capitalist France, a capitalist Germany, a capitalist Britain, a defense of capitalism in Europe, the sort of goalist dream of Europe being the third power, that sort of type of politics. So, yeah, comrades from the left have gone in and supported him, on his tax the rich type stuff. But really what they're backing, and I think this is the truth, is they're backing a capitalist party or a petty bourgeois party that can certainly be, corrupted, bought by the billionaires if and when necessary. This isn't a working class party. And therefore, when I read in the Socialist, and I'm not just an article, but in their What We Say editorial. Now, I don't know whether this is the editorial of, I can't remember his name. Anyway, the editor, I think it's Jay someone or other. I don't know whether it's his editorial or whether it's the full-time collective. They have about 4, 6, 7 full-timers working on the Socialist every week. You think about the Weekly Worker. I think we produce a vastly better paper, by the way. I do think the Socialist is perhaps, sorry, say this quietly, perhaps the worst paper on the left. But either way, they've got a full-time staff producing it, but it works in close conjunction. This is official. I've looked it up on their website. This is how we work. The editorial team, the editor who's on the executive of Spew, they work closely in conjunction with the executive, and I presume Hannah Sell, the general secretary. So what do they say about the Greens and the election of Zach Polanski's? They say, oh, there's clearly a mood for change in Britain. Look at all these people voting for this eco-populist. I think it was about a 36% turnout of their 85,000 membership, but I already mentioned the margin was crushing. But okay, they say, this is the editorial, they say, look, this is a party with no roots in the working class, no history, no background in the working class movement. Indeed, if you go back to the origins of the Green Party, it's the People Party. It's a right-wing party founded by, I can't remember his name, but the Uncle Goldsmith. Can't remember his first name. Anyway, right-wing bigot. But the point I'm making here is that the comrades in the Socialist are quite right. No background in the working class movement and no socialist ideology whatsoever. Now, there has been those on the left of the Socialist Party. What was his name? I can't remember it. It will come to me, or someone will heckle, or someone will put it up in chat. Derek Wall. There you are. Yeah, I've hauled it from the back of my mind. He called himself a socialist. As far as I know, Zach doesn't call himself a socialist, and certainly the Green Party most definitely doesn't call itself a socialist party. So what do the comrades propose? They actually propose that the Green Party affiliates to your party. Well, because your party has got 800,000 people, cough, cough, where the Green Party's only got 85,000. So it ought to affiliate, and it ought to affiliate along with the trade unions and along with the Socialist Party. And what we'll have is a federal party, and we'll find ourselves, in other words, a Labour Party Mark II, where we'll feel nice and happy. And we can rerun the history of militant, well, I was about to say first time tragedy, second time fast, but that's, first time tragedy, second time triumph. Come off it, guys. If you get the trade unions to affiliate, imagine for a moment, and okay, it takes a little bit, but imagine Sharon Graham affiliating. I've got 1 million votes. I've got loads of money. I've got loads of full-timers. What happens then to the policy, the Green Party sort of skepticism about NATO and Trident and spending loads of money on arms or nuclear power? What happens under those circumstances? You end up with a Labour Party, of course. It's obvious. The Socialist Party is not going to be hegemonic in such an organisation. That's certainly what I'm convinced of. So I think that's a strategic mistake. But the fact that they're advocating it, I think, is a giveaway. Now, if you look at the British Labour Party, it's a product of history. And, what I would argue, if the Labour Party didn't exist, you would not start off as some comrades do, like Spew, some comrades in America do. How do we get a Labour Party? That's the last thing that I would propose. No, the first thing I would propose is, how do we get a communist party? How do we get a mass communist party? How do we spread the influence of communism into the trade unions? Remember, trade unions, again, according to the same source, the editorial of the Socialists, I quoted it last week, says that the trade unions represent the working class as a whole. I mean, my God, how ignorant and how stupid can you get? They represent sectional interests. It's the communists, if they're armed with a proper program, a scientific program, with the politics of Marx, that aspires to represent the working class as a whole, not the trade unions as presently organized. It's absurd to suggest that. So I think that the comrades are profoundly disorientated. I think they're politically bankrupt. But quite frankly, the SWP isn't much better. For what they say is, well, what we want to do is, we don't want James Schneider's joint selection process with the Greens. We want to avoid that. And I agree with them. We don't want to get together and choose candidates. One person, one vote. Who would win here? Who would win in Britain? I don't know what the result would be. But we don't want to do that, do we? Of course not. We don't want to spread that idea. This is a merger, not of the working class with the communists. It's a merger of class programs, or class proto programs is what is being talked about. So what the SWP say is, well, what we should do is we should stand our own candidates. I agree. They want an umbrella. Okay, I don't. I want centralization. And then what they say is we shouldn't automatically stand down in favor of the Greens. We should only stand down for left-wing Greens. Why? Why on earth should you stand down for left-wing? Of course, I'm not saying you just go ahead, blanket, and you say you stand everywhere, it's a principle or something like that. But why shouldn't you stand against a left-wing Green? I mean, what is a left-wing Green? How left are they? I would say not very myself. If Zach Polanski is an example of a left-wing Green, he wants to defend capitalism. Okay, at the moment, it will be very much, I don't know if anyone's visited Brighton over the last 20 years, very much a Brighton sort of. Mike has got you've got a daughter there, Mike? Well, that you can see why it elects.
That's right.
MP. And this is what the Green Party is. Go to the small shoppies, go to the small businesses, the small breweries, the specialist craft shops, and specialist food companies. This is very much the sort of, how should I put it, bedrock of the Greens, where their finances come from, where their cadre, their activists come from. Anyway, my argument is that the SWP is wrong about the Green Party. Why? Because what the SWP is, it's obsessed with the streets and strikes. And what we advocate is revolutionary electoralism. You can build a party by standing in elections. That should actually give us a hint when it comes to reform and Tommy Robinson. Standing in elections is not an automatic avenue to corruption. It's not an automatic avenue for careerists. We want control over our MPs and councillors, and that is something we need to raise in Y Party, over the so-called independents, over Corbyn. Where's the money go? What you say in Parliament should be centrally controlled. How you vote is not a matter of conscience. It's a matter of party policy. So when it comes to things like the trans issue, we want a party line. We might be a minority, but we want a party line that the MPs, councillors argue and vote for. We want a situation where trade union officials are accountable to the party, of where it's not the party is the servant of the MPs, the servant of councillors, the servant of general secretaries. It's the other way around. Now, that doesn't guarantee you anything, doesn't guarantee anything of the sort, but it provides the best conditions, especially if we have freedom of speech, freedom of criticism, to bring in these people, to impose discipline over these people, because they're in an alien environment when you're in Parliament, when you're negotiating with the boss. It's a different life to being on the shop floor or in the office or in the call center. So these people, these comrades, we appreciate their role, we appreciate their talents, but they should be servants of the movement, and it shouldn't be the other way around. And the danger precisely of what we've been told so far about Y Party, it looks like our friend Max has got his way and will have some version of sortition. Okay, it's not what he wanted, but we said you opened the door, you've legitimized it, and there you are. We said that what they'll use it for is to get rid of debate, have a rally. We're told that something like 10,000 people will turn up for the foundation rally and we'll vote online. This is a travesty of democracy. It's a Bonapartist operation. And our answer actually, of course, we want to challenge that structure, but our answer really has to come from the branches, and it has to come from organizing from the branches, and the branches taking control of your party and making it your party. What those at the top do with their sortition and their take it or leave it constitution and their tightly controlled amendments and elections, that's something else. So we have a possibility. I think it's a slim possibility, but the chances of us getting a DSA, on the table was never going to be on. The instinct of Corbyn, the instinct of those surrounding Corbyn, these full-time apparatchiks, is to control, control, control. And even safe people, like John Rees, hasn't even been given an entry into the upper circle. That's why he's so grumpy with it. If he was on the inside, of course, we know what he'd be arguing for. We've seen the works of our comrade John before, and it was respect. So, okay, there's going to be less democracy in Y Party than there was in respect. Anyway, I finished there. And 55 minutes. There we are. Nearly hit the hour.
Thank you very much, Jack. While I wait for, well, there's one person's got their hand up, but I do want to make a couple of points myself. So firstly, in terms of Gaza, I wanted to mention the situation there. So, as people will be aware, the Gaza City is under a huge attack. Um, Apparently, they're using new bombs recently that they're getting from the United States. If you see any of the explosions when they've taken down those high-rise flats, it's been, apparently a lot worse than it was before. The shrapnel is really spreading far, and people are dying who are caught in the shrapnel, not just in the building. And then the people who are being kicked out of Gaza City are forced on to a road by the sea, down to Al Mawasi, where there is nowhere to go because there's no land, there's nowhere for people to pitch tents. And now some people there, I saw a demonstration, which was probably the most kind of strangely optimistic demonstration I've seen in Gaza for quite some time, where these people in Gaza City gathered to say that they weren't going to move. We'll die here. We're not going to. We refuse to move. So I don't know what Israel is going to do with that, but they are right to a certain extent, because when they go to Al Mawasi, they'll be in really, like, probably even worse conditions than they've been in Gaza City, where they've at least had some access to accommodation, even though it's very limited. Of course, it's all terrible, but in Al Mawasi, they're saying it's much worse, and people are in tents. In it's a very dry area near the sea, and apparently they're expecting flooding as soon as the weather turns worse. So I just wanted to ask, comrades, what you think really, Israel's motivation is at this stage. Is it taking them down here, kind of kettling them in this area in order to arrange for them to be transported out of there? Do you think it's like across to Rafah, or boats, or, it's kind of hard to know exactly, because I don't know that there's any of the countries in the Arab world, except there's been some talk about Lebanon being prepared to take Palestinians at a price. But it's hard to know, are they going to put them there? Are they going to corral them there and starve them all to death, because they're closing off all aid again? It's hard to know exactly. I've heard that it's all been closed off. But then I heard that some stuff is getting through, but it's just commercial, and it's not any use. The food is no good at all. Yesterday in Cork, we had Nick Maynard, Professor Nick Maynard, who's been speaking on BBC as well. He's a doctor who goes over there to train staff. Anyway, he was just speaking about the horrific nature of it. So that was just one thing. And the other thing was just to say that in Ireland, we're going to have a presidential election in October, and the candidate of the left and the centre is a woman called Catherine Connolly, who's independent. Now, I've looked her up several times. To me, she's like a Mary Robinson character, really, to the left of Mary Robinson, but that kind of type of, like, not, there's no, very uncharismatic, nun-like figure to me, who basically, she's to the left of bourgeois politics, but she's not socialist or anything of the kind. So I've been arguing with comrades in the People for Profit and elsewhere, and other comrades, that really what we need to be looking at is getting rid of the presidency, because it's an unelected monarch. But for them, although they agree with me and say, yes, 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 that's very, you're blah, 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 right points, and they just automatically say that they're going to support her. It's kind of like a de facto thing. Like you mentioned about the Green Party, you can't possibly consider not taking a reformist approach to a left bourgeois politician, of supporting them because they say the right things, although they lack any understanding or commitment to the working class. She's a liberal, a left liberal. Anyway, hopefully I'll write about it at some stage before the election. And my final point was in relation to the right-wing movement, and the fact that yesterday, Elon Musk spoke to that demonstration, and I've heard or I've read that there was plenty of money provided for the organization, for the flags by right-wing and Christian organizations in the United States. And in Ireland, that's also the case. I mean, you saw Conor McGregor at the White House on St. Patrick's Day, or maybe you didn't, but the Irish Taoiseach got short shrift, and Trump said his favorite Irish person was Conor McGregor, who is a cage fighter and is quite notorious um, for his abuse of women, rapes, etc. But he has been funded and supported by the United States as well. So it's like they have, I'm not saying that the support for the right wing isn't real, but it is definitely amped up by the fact that they have US support. And despite the fact that they have all got nationalist agendas, they are an international movement in a way that the left isn't. So what happened on Saturday in London will have an effect in Ireland on the right wing here. They'll be so buoyed up by the numbers, and it will give them great confidence to come back at the left and also at the um, migrant community, because there's been, like in Britain, a lot of attacks on migrants. Actually, some of these people are not migrants. They've been living here, they were born here, but because they're Asian, they're singled out. Anyway, okay, that's me. My tuppence worth. Ian.
Good evening, comrades. I just wanted to make a couple of observations about the Tommy Robinson organised demonstration in London. I think police figure was around 110,000. And I compare that to the 1970s when the National Front were pushing the Liberals into kind of fourth place in some by-elections and that kind of thing. It's a remarkable kind of turnaround, isn't it? That effectively now, the politics of the 1970s National Front is pretty much mainstream politics. What was particularly interesting reading some of the accounts of Elon Musk's intervention. So in a kind of televised, well, in a kind of streamed interview with Tommy Robinson, Elon Musk was talking about the need for revolutionary change of government, the dissolution of parliament, and then going on to say that violence is coming. By implication, violence against the people who are there, and that if you either fight back or die. So there's clearly an implication for the people who are at that demonstration to take up the cudgels, as it were, quite literally. And this is already happening in Portsmouth. An attempt to start up a branch of your party at Fratton Community Centre was met with people from a group of people marching down the street called the Portsmouth Patriots. People locked themselves in effectively and called the police. So no one was actually injured, but it is, I think, an indication of what may well happen in the future. Certainly in terms of trying to organise in areas where there is a lot of reform support. Now, I think Jack is absolutely right to say that it's absolutely stupid to just simply call them Nazis or fascists or whatever else. Yes, they are English nationalists, typically English nationalists, but I don't think I don't think the Welsh or Scots are immune from their own strand. If you try and trace out who's paying for all the flags, there is sort of fingers being pointed in various directions, but it doesn't take too much imagination to see how the money could be funneled, whether from Elon Musk personally or via some other kind of third party or whatever, or some other kind of group. Literally, tens of thousands of flags are going to go from that demonstration and to be stuck up on lampposts everywhere. Someone's got to be paying for them. What concerns me most of all is the idea that, for example, the development of your party as a potential for being perceived as a threat will lead to the ruling class unleashing effectively our own version of the homegrown version of the SR, as organised thugs to break up potentially left-wing meetings that could potentially challenge. I mean, as far as I can see, and I'm speaking here only for places like County Durham, where I'm living. I think Alan Strickland MP is toast at the next election. If you look at all the reform votes that are in his constituency, it's quite a diverse constituency, from sort of nice, cosy Twee, Sedgefield through to Newton Aycliffe and Spennymoor, which are rock solid reform kind of territory. I even saw a local pub in another sort of small mining village when I was out for a run this morning, not only flying the Union flag and the flag of St George, but even Reform Party flags outside the pub. And presumably this is a selling point for drinking in that particular pub. So it's Oh, and also, of course, Musk was talking about the assassination of Charlie Kirk, and of course, immediately Trump tried to level the accusation at the left. But of course, the shooter, Tyler Robinson, both his parents are registered Republicans. He hadn't been known to have any kind of particular political affiliation before. They're desperately looking for something to tie him. The latest kind of bit of idle speculation in the New York Post was that he'd had a romantic relationship with a trans woman or some such, and they'll be looking for nonsense like this. But the fact is, in a sense, the shooter has come from one of Trump's own, in a sense. And there is also Nick Fuentes has tried to stamp on any kind of speculation that, in fact, Tyler Robinson was a shooter because he wasn't sort of right wing. Charlie Kirk wasn't right wing enough, and from that point of view, what we'll see then, I think, is a wall of silence from someone like Trump. So it's quite difficult for them to turn Tyler Robinson into their sort of Horst Wessel moment. And then also, just finally, there were 26 officers injured by Tommy Robinson's pissed up followers in Whitehall, and about 9 arrests. Just an interesting kind of contrast with 800 odd arrests in London of the elderly and infirm as a result of support for Palestine action. And that was it. Thank you.
Thanks, Ian. Gus?
Thank you. Yeah, so kind of responding to something Anne said about Tommy Robinson demonstration that was being supported by right-wing groups in the United States. I think it's pretty clear that we're dealing with an international effort here. Kind of drawing a comparison to the Netherlands, where recently a young 17-year-old girl was horrifically assaulted at night and murdered, and it turned out it was an asylum seeker, which kind of led to a similar campaign, not on the scale of the demonstration that happened, but this was clearly supported by right-wing groups from the States, but also by parts of government parties our government recently collapsed, but former government parties that instigated this, right? And this, I think, this is also kind of the problem with the anti-fascist no platforming strategy is you want to ban these groups when they're clearly supported by the government. So, okay, do we have even the impact as the left to no platform government parties. That's just an illusion to me, and it really lets the state and the ruling class off the hook, so to say, and it even goes into coalition with parts of the state. Like we see this happening in Germany, where the left. I saw an article in the German Jacobin where was enthusiastically saying, "Okay, we should support an AFD ban because." Well, the state can't hurt us as much as the fascists can. Like in Germany, have these converts even seen the repression in Germany that's been happening towards the left the last few months? So really, our biggest fear shouldn't be fascist groups. Really, it's the state right now that's attacking the left. It's the state that's whether the U.S. state or the Dutch state that's really instigating these kind of demonstrations. So the no platforming strategy just doesn't work. Even though I don't think it works in general, but it especially doesn't work when you have you're up against the state instead of just small fascist groups. That's it.
Thank you, Gus. Raphael and then Tobias. Toby.
Hello, comrades. I wanted to bring up the topic of your party, since it's my understanding that it's likely that in the next day or two we're likely to get some sort of formal announcement regarding conference, and that it might be looking like we will have an earlier November date after all, rather than a delay till next year, as well as prior to that regional conferences around the country, which my understanding is will not be sortitioned and will be open events. Now, whether there will be working political events of the sort that we might prefer is questionable. But nonetheless, these provide an opening, especially since they may be able to provide amendments to constitutional deliberations at the founding conference that otherwise only the sortition delegates will be able to. Secondly, it's possible that the sort of co-option scheme that Max Stanley had proposed and that made part of his proposal some weeks ago will be implemented in some form, and especially of a sortition pool, or rather a sortition delegates numbering as high as 10,000, it's not inconceivable that there's going to be several readers of the Weekly Worker at least there. And in that case, it's not inconceivable that someone from the CPGB is asked to participate in a speaking but not voting role to make proposals at the conference. So I guess I'm interested in the PCC's current positions and ideas about intervention and presenting a coherent, comprehensive program and amendments to try to make this party a communist party, a mass working class party. Thank you.
Thank you. Toby?
Okay, can you hear us now?
Oh, yes.
Good. Okay. I seem to have lost my own picture, but anyway, it doesn't matter. Okay. About the Tommy Robinson thing yesterday, I'm relying on a report in the Italian Communist Daily Manifesto, but they say that Steve Bannon was there, which does seem to be quite interesting in terms of international organization, because he was for some years he's been in favour of international organisation of what I might describe as fascists. I don't know if you would describe them as fascists, but he has been trying to organise this for some time. And there was the whole business where he thought he had headquarters in Italy, which in the end I think he lost the ex-monastery or whatever the hell it was, where he was going to organise from. But Bannon was supposed to be there. You also, now I may have got this one from the Italian radio, I'm not sure, the Danish People's Party, which again you could describe as right populist or fascist or whatever, but their leader was there. So that does seem to me to suggest a degree of international organization. Also, I was sort of struck by the fact, look, 150,000 people hadn't just come from Essex or Bromley, or I'm assuming that they wouldn't have got that many from central London. Maybe I'm being optimistic, but I think they came from further afield, from Bexley, Bromley, and Essex, and therefore that they were bussed in or came by trains, and somebody must have bloody well organised this, and this requires money, and it would suggest that there was a national organisation. Now, I mean, not clear whether the EDL is supposed to have dissolved itself. I'm not sure whether it really has. And you also got things like Patriotic Alternative, Britain First, and so forth. I mean, they're all look, I accept that many of these people may be just racist thugs, but there are organised fascists who must have played a big role in organising something on such a scale as that. I mean, you know, you don't just get it by advertising on the internet, not 150,000 people, come on. So that I think this is quite, the whole thing is quite serious. And apart from the sort of threat that was Ian was talking about earlier to your party branches, it does strike me that if this lot are as strong as this, that they are likely to do the kind of things that fascists did in the 70s and go into areas like, say, Lewisham or Tower Hamlets or Brixton or wherever. And, you know, that has got to be stopped. I mean, here, okay, I don't know whether I should say this sort of thing, but I presume we're not being sort of tapped in some way, but, you know, some sort of defence groups would need to be organised in those localities against that kind of physical attack, which is what I think they're likely to do. They're probably more likely to start with people of a Southern Asian background rather than Afro-Caribbeans, because they think that they're less likely to fight. But I mean, I think they're quite likely to do that with these sort of numbers. I mean, these are bigger numbers than Mosley had in the 30s. He didn't have 150,000 people in one place at one time. I mean, you know, I'm not talking about the total strength of the BUF, but I mean, at one time, you never had 150,000. You never had 150,000 NF or any of these, or BNP or Wapping or whatever. You've never had so many of them in one place at one time. And look, they will be bloody confident. And they are getting, you know, this American money if Bannon is involved as well as Musk. I mean, Musk has got the money, but I take Bannon more seriously as a political organizer than Musk. And also the other fellow who was there, apart from the Danish one, was Zemmour, who is the French, you know, he's a self-hating Jewish Nazi. He sort of thinks that Dreyfus was guilty and Vichy were wonderful. So, you know, they were supposed to be, I think I got that off the radio, so that it was an internationally organised thing, and I think it was a well-organised thing in terms of its national organisation. I think this is bloody serious, and we've got to deal with it. And I don't think chatting, you know, having a debate with a career criminal like Robinson is worth the effort, frankly. And I think you might come, look, what happened? I mean, what is the attitude of the state? I mean, he beat someone up, and I think it was on King's Cross station, and was filmed doing it, and there were no charges. I mean, look, that wasn't political. That was just beating someone to smithereens in a railway station, and it was witnessed and filmed. you know, and nothing was done. And yet people are arrested all the time for just putting up a placard saying, I support Palestine action. I mean, this is a ridiculous situation, quite honestly. And during the riots, not this summer, but last summer, which Robinson was supposed to be organising from outside the country. I mean, there was no real attempt to sort of get him. You know, there is such a thing as Interpol and so on. I mean, the state seems incredibly tolerant, which may tie in with what Ian said, that they may be thinking in terms of using them against the left. I think that it is really dangerous. What else was I going to say? There is still some talk, whether it'll lead anywhere, of dockers strikes or general strikes by fringe unions in Italy in relation to, well, I think they've given a definite date, but they've said it'd come earlier if the Israelis attack the flotilla. But I mean, whether it would be bloody good if it did happen, but I mean, I can't swear to it. I mean, these sort of unions can sometimes have some success in organising a bus strike for half a day or whatever, but whether they'd actually succeed in doing a sort of serious blocking of the ports or a general strike is another matter. We're not talking about the main union, though the dockers linked to the CGIL have shown some sympathy towards these things, but I mean, they're not officially committed to that. Okay, they probably were. Yeah, France. We did see a government fall, and we did see quite a number of people on the streets in a protest that was supposed to block the country. Had a fair effect, but not as much as they'd hoped for. But there is a general strike by the trade unions, not all of them, but including the CGT, coming in this coming week. So that might be another thing in France. I realise that for all this to have an effect, you'd have to have a movement that kept on going. But I think we can't ignore what's happening in France. Obviously, there's always the possibility of the treachery of the PS, of the Socialist Party, and particularly of Glanzmann, who isn't actually even in the Socialist Party, but in a thing called Place Publique, but is their probable presidential candidate when there is a presidential election. I mean, I know that the French Greens and the French Communists seem, on the whole, to be sticking with LFI, even if the socialists are likely to rat. So anyway, I'll leave it at that. But my main feeling was yesterday, you know, sharing the size of a demonstration in central London of people who are led by fascists, even if wouldn't call all of them fascists or right. A lot of them are just common old garden racists. But I mean, the other thing was that, now I forget which one of these characters, but the Great Replacement stuff came. I can't remember which one of them came up with that, but you know I mean, as far as I'm concerned, the Great Replacement theory is bloody Nazi, because the full undoctored version of it is the Jews are seeking to replace the white Christian Europeans with black or brown Muslims. That is the gist of the Great Replacement theory, and that was certainly put forward by someone on a platform. I've never forgotten whom. But I think that, you know, we can't look. It's gone way beyond just mere prejudice. I mean, it is talk of deportations. And they don't mean just of the people who've arrived in the small boats that they're allegedly so exercised about. The other thing about all this is, of course, if Starmer hadn't taken the line that he has taken over the last year, the line of smash the gang, stop the boats, and the line he took on the riots, not this summer, but the summer before, right, where he just talked about the criminality. He didn't talk about the racism, and he was against any body in the Labour Party participating in counter-protests. Now, presumably they did the same thing this time. I don't know, but apart from Diane Abbott, who is suspended from the Labour Party anyway, I didn't hear of any Labour MPs present at the Stand Up to Racism thing. Okay, look, I'll shut up at that point. Okay.
Thanks, Toby. Just one point I'd like to mention is that I think that the flag makes it all look very uniform, because obviously somebody's paying for these flags and they're distributing them in their thousands, in their, tens of thousands. So that makes it look as though everybody is the same. They've all come there with the same flag. But listening to the interviews with people who were at that demonstration, it was evident to me that everybody had their own issues. It could be housing, it could be whatever, welfare, feeling forgotten, and they were blaming migrants. So I don't think, I think it's right wing, and I agree with you, there are fascists there, but wouldn't call it a fascist movement. And the flag, raise the flag, is also the same slogan in Ireland. So people are putting the tricolour outside their house. So it's not the friendly tricolour flag of the North or of kneecap, it's the tricolour of the xenophobes. Justin and then Mike.
Yeah, first of all, I don't know if anyone's told Tobias, but he sounds like Vernon's Dalek with the audio.